Have you ever noticed how the most manipulative person in your life loses all their power the moment you stop reacting? You think silence is weak, but in the right hands, it can break empires. She wanted a reaction. She wanted you to flinch, to fight, to prove you still cared. But you didn't. You looked her in the eye and stayed silent. No rage, no begging, just presence. And in that moment, her carefully constructed self-image started to crack. Because nothing is more threatening to a fragile ego than the man who doesn't need to raise his voice to walk away. It always begins the same way. You meet someone magnetic, beautiful, emotionally unpredictable. She draws you in not with affection, but with lack of it. You feel like you have to earn her softness. Every compliment from her feels like a reward. Every withdrawal like a punishment. Take James, 32, successful architect. He met Elena at a gallery opening. She was stunning, sharp-witted, but there was something else, an emotional distance that made him feel like he was always reaching for something just out of grasp. The way she looked at him, interested but not impressed, available but not accessible. "You're too intense," she'd say when he tried to connect. Then days later, "You never make an effort anymore." The mixed signals became his obsession. He began to adjust, subtly at first. Change his tone, his boundaries, his decisions. Not to be loved, but to be less rejected. You justify it as compromise. But deep down, you're just scared she'll leave. That fear becomes your leash. And the moment she senses it, she pulls. And you react. That reaction, anger, defensiveness, silence laced with pain. That's what feeds her ego. Not because she's evil, but because her own sense of power is built on how much she can move you. The drama isn't accidental. It's strategic. Every test, every withdrawal, every moment she makes you doubt yourself. It's all designed to keep you off balance. Because a man who's centered, who knows his worth, who doesn't need her validation, that man can't be controlled. And control is what her wounded ego craves most. Here's where most men get trapped. You think you're responding to her, but really, you're reacting to the fear of not being chosen. Somewhere inside, a younger version of you learned that your worth depended on pleasing others, especially women. Maybe it was your mother's conditional love, her approval given only when you performed correctly. Maybe it was that first heartbreak at 17 when she left you for someone cooler, more confident, more worthy. Maybe it was years of being told that good men sacrifice themselves for love, that your needs come second, that suffering for someone proves your devotion. So when she withholds affection, it reactivates your survival self. You over-explain. You try to fix. You try to stay calm, but it's performative. You're still reacting. Carl Jung Shadow Work reveals this trap clearly. The war between persona and shadow. The mask you wear, confident, collected, composed, is now cracking under the weight of your unhealed need for validation. Meanwhile, the shadow, the repressed parts of you, starts to project all your unmet needs onto her. You don't love her. You love what her approval promises to fix inside you. The emptiness where your self-worth should be. The wound that never healed from childhood. The fear that you're fundamentally unlovable. Let me tell you about David. 40 years old, divorced, dating again after 2 years of therapy. He thought he'd healed. He'd done the work, read the books, understood his patterns. Then he met Sophia. Sophia was everything his ex-wife wasn't. Spontaneous, passionate, unpredictable. But she had this way of making him feel like he was always on trial. She'd cancel plans last minute, then accuse him of being controlling when he expressed disappointment. She'd flirt with other men in front of him, then call him insecure when he felt uncomfortable. "I'm not like other guys," David would tell himself. "I communicate. I'm emotionally available. I don't play games." But every time Sophia withdrew, every time she compared him to her ex, every time she threatened to leave, David felt that familiar panic. The confident man he'd become in therapy would dissolve. And in its place, a desperate boy would emerge, willing to sacrifice his own needs just to stop her from walking away. But here's the psychological trap Jung identified. When you abandon yourself to keep someone else, you're not loving them. You're using them to avoid facing the parts of yourself you've never learned to love. David wasn't attracted to Sophia's beauty. He was addicted to the validation he felt when she chose him over her other options. And every time she withheld that validation, his shadow would scream, "You're not enough. You've never been enough." So he'd chase, explain, defend, prove. He'd write long texts analyzing their relationship. He'd show up with flowers after fights. He'd change his weekend plans to accommodate her moods. Each reaction feeding her ego, each explanation giving her more power over his emotional state. This is what Jung meant by projection. David was seeing in Sophia all the qualities he'd disowned in himself. Her confidence, her ability to walk away, her refusal to beg for love. But instead of reclaiming those qualities, he tried to earn them from her. Instead of becoming the chooser, he remained desperate to be chosen. And with every reaction, Sophia's ego would grow stronger. Because she could see it clearly, this successful, intelligent man could be reduced to an anxious child with just the right combination of attention and withdrawal. His need became her drug. His desperation became her power source. What part of yourself have you silenced just to feel loved? What dreams did you abandon to avoid rejection? What truths do you swallow to keep the peace? These are the questions your shadow is asking, but your ego is too afraid to answer. But it never works, because no ego, hers or yours, can carry the weight of your abandoned self-worth. The more you need her to validate you, the less she respects you. The more you prove your devotion, the less she values it. It's a psychological paradox that destroys men every day. So here's the truth bomb that will change everything. Her ego isn't the problem. It's your constant reaction to it that keeps it alive. The moment you stop responding to her mind games, her ultimatums, her passive-aggressive silences, her ego has no mirror left to reflect itself. Because her power was never real. It was borrowed from your emotional instability. Think about it. The woman who tests your boundaries isn't testing you. She's testing her ability to control you. When you stay calm, centered, and unbothered, you force her to face a terrifying possibility. That her old tactics no longer work. That the emotional leash she used to pull now hangs loose. And in that realization, her ego begins to panic. Because if she can't control you, she has to face herself. And not every woman is ready to do that. Let me share what happened to Marcus, a software engineer who finally understood this. His girlfriend Rachel had a pattern. Every few weeks, she'd create drama. She'd accuse him of not caring enough, threaten to move out, or bring up his past mistakes. "You still talk to your ex on social media," she'd say, even though it was a single comment on a mutual friend's post. "You don't prioritize me," she'd claim, ignoring the fact that he'd rearrange his entire schedule around her needs. For months, Marcus would spiral. He'd write long texts explaining his feelings. He'd buy flowers. He'd promise to change. He'd delete social media, stop talking to female friends, work fewer hours, anything to prove his commitment. And temporarily, Rachel would soften. She'd be sweet, affectionate, grateful. But the pattern would repeat, each cycle requiring more sacrifice from Marcus to restore peace. Then, one Tuesday night, Rachel started her usual routine. "I don't think you really want me here," she said, tears in her eyes. "Maybe I should just pack my things. Maybe you'd be happier without me." It was her nuclear option, the threat of abandonment that had always brought Marcus to his knees. But this time, instead of panicking, Marcus looked at her and said quietly, "If that's what you feel you need to do, I understand." No begging, no explaining, no emotional reaction at all. Rachel was stunned. "That's it? You're not going to fight for us?" Marcus simply said, "I've already shown you how I feel about us. I'm not going to keep proving it every time you doubt it." The shift was immediate. Rachel's tears stopped. Her manipulation had hit a wall. For the first time, she had to face the emptiness of her own emotional patterns instead of getting lost in his reaction. She tried again. "So you don't care if I leave?" But Marcus just looked at her with calm eyes and said, "I care about you, but I won't be held hostage by the threat of losing you." This is what Jung meant when he talked about the transcendent function, the psychological process that emerges when you stop feeding unconscious patterns and force them into consciousness. You're not destroying her ego by being cruel. You're refusing to be the fuel it needs to survive. And in that refusal, something remarkable happens. Both of you are forced to grow. But here's what most men miss. This isn't about punishing her. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself you gave away to earn love you should never have had earned. When Marcus stopped reacting to Rachel's threats, he wasn't being cold. He was being authentic. He was finally showing up as the man he actually was, not the desperate boy her manipulation had created. Rachel left that night. She packed a bag and went to her sister's, expecting Marcus to chase her, call her, beg her to come back. But he didn't. He went to bed, slept peacefully for the first time in months, and went to work the next day. No frantic texts, no flowers, no grand gestures. After 3 days, Rachel returned, confused and shaken. "I don't understand you anymore," she said. And for the first time, Marcus replied with complete honesty. "Good, because the man you understood was killing himself to keep you comfortable." That's when the real conversation began. Not the dramatic, emotionally charged arguments they'd had before, but a real discussion about what they both needed from a relationship. Rachel had to confront the fact that her need for constant reassurance was destroying the very connection she claimed to want. Marcus had to admit that his people-pleasing wasn't love, it was fear wearing a compassionate mask. When did you first learn that your worth was conditional? What would it feel like to take that power back? What parts of yourself have you hidden to avoid rejection? This moment of truth reveals something profound. Most of what we call love is actually just mutual ego feeding. She needs to feel chosen, so she creates competition. He needs to feel needed, so he sacrifices himself. Neither is loving the other. They're both just trying to fill their own emptiness through someone else's validation. But when you stop playing the game, when you stop feeding the ego, something deeper becomes possible. Not the desperate attachment most people mistake for love, but genuine intimacy between two whole people who choose each other from abundance, not need. So what happens when you no longer play the game? Everything changes. You stop trying to be understood by someone who weaponizes confusion. You stop giving attention to someone who trades it for control. You stop needing to prove that you're a good man to someone who only respects distance, not devotion. Instead, you hold your posture. You don't chase. You don't argue. You don't even explain why you've gone silent. You just let her face the emptiness she projected onto you. And in that space, something shifts, not in her, but in you. Let me tell you about the moment everything clicked for James, the architect we met earlier. After months of Elena's emotional games, he finally saw the pattern clearly. It was a Friday night. Elena had been distant all week, barely responding to his texts. When he asked if she wanted to spend the weekend together, she said, "I need space." "You're too needy." The old James would have spiraled. He would have spent the weekend analyzing every interaction, wondering what he'd done wrong. He would have called his friends, dissecting every conversation with Elena, looking for clues about what went wrong. He would have shown up at her apartment with apologies and flowers, ready to negotiate for her affection like it was a business contract. But something had shifted in James. Maybe it was reading Jung's work on individuation. Maybe it was finally recognizing the deeper layers of his emotional entanglement. A dynamic Carl Jung Shadow Work describes as the unconscious dance between one person's repressed wounds and another's need for control. Or maybe it was just exhaustion, the soul-deep tiredness that comes from constantly performing for someone else's approval. Instead, James simply said, "Okay, let me know when you're ready to talk." And then he did something revolutionary. He went on with his life. He didn't text her, didn't check her social media, didn't ask mutual friends about her. For the first time in months, he focused on himself. That weekend, he worked on a personal architectural project he'd abandoned. A sustainable housing design he'd been passionate about before Elena consumed all his emotional energy. As he drew, he remembered why he'd become an architect in the first place. Not for money or status, but because he wanted to create spaces where people could feel at home. He called his brother, someone he'd been neglecting because Elena always had drama when he spent time with family. "Where have you been?" his brother asked. "I feel like I haven't really talked to you in months." James realized it was true. He'd been so focused on managing Elena's emotions that he'd neglected the relationships that actually nourished him. He went for a long run without his phone, feeling his own thoughts for the first time in months. As his feet hit the pavement, he noticed things he'd missed. The way the light filtered through the trees, the sound of his own breathing, the simple pleasure of moving his body through space. He'd forgotten what it felt like to be present in his own life, instead of constantly anxious about someone else's approval. Gradually, he remembered something he'd forgotten: who he was before he started trying to earn Elena's love. He was creative, passionate, driven. He had dreams that didn't revolve around managing someone else's emotions. He had friendships that didn't require constant emotional labor. He had interests that filled him with joy instead of anxiety. That Sunday, he had dinner with his parents, something he'd been putting off because Elena often created drama when he spent time with them. As he sat at their kitchen table, eating his mother's cooking and listening to his father's stories, he felt something he hadn't felt in months: peace. This was love without conditions, connection without games, acceptance without performance. Monday came. No word from Elena. Tuesday, Wednesday. By Thursday, James realized something profound. He wasn't anxious anymore. He wasn't waiting for her validation to feel whole. The man who had been desperately checking his phone every 5 minutes was gone, replaced by someone who actually had better things to do. Friday evening, Elena called. "I've been thinking about us," she said, her voice softer than it had been in weeks. "Maybe we should talk." There was something different in her tone. Less command, more request. She was testing whether her old power still worked. But instead of the relief he expected to feel, James felt nothing. Not anger, not excitement, just clarity. "I've been thinking too," he said, "and I realize I don't want to be with someone who needs to withdraw love to feel powerful." The silence on the phone was deafening. Elena wasn't prepared for this version of James, the one who wasn't begging for another chance. "That's not fair," she said. "I just needed some time to think." "And you took it," James replied calmly. "Just like you'll take it again next month and the month after that. Because that's your pattern. And I'm done participating in it." Elena tried a different approach. "I thought you cared about me." "I do care about you," James said. "But I care about myself too. And the version of myself I'd become when I'm with you isn't someone I recognize or respect." This is the moment Jung called individuation, when you stop living for external validation and start living from your authentic self. You realize that all this time, you weren't trying to love her. You were trying to win her ego's approval because you thought that meant you were enough. But you've always been enough. You were just trying to prove it to someone who profits off your doubt. Elena tried once more. "So we're really over?" "Just like that." "No," James said. "Not just like that. We've been over for months. I've just been too afraid to admit it." This wasn't cruelty. This was compassion for both of them. Elena needed to learn that love couldn't be earned through manipulation. And James needed to remember that his worth wasn't determined by someone else's ability to appreciate it. The conversation ended. Elena was furious, confused, hurt. She'd expected the usual dance, his desperation, her grudging forgiveness, the temporary peace that comes from avoiding truth. Instead, she got something she'd never experienced: a man who valued himself too much to accept crumbs of affection. What would change in your life if you stopped needing anyone's permission to be yourself? What relationships would shift if you stopped managing other people's emotions? What dreams would resurface if you weren't constantly exhausted by drama? James discovered the answers to these questions over the following weeks. Without the constant emotional crisis of his relationship with Elena, he had energy for things that actually mattered. His work improved. His designs became more innovative, more personal. His friendships deepened. He was present instead of distracted, authentic instead of performing. His creativity returned. He started writing again, something he'd abandoned years ago. He started dating again, but differently, as a man who knew his worth instead of one desperately seeking to prove it. When he met Sarah, a colleague at a design conference, The difference was immediately apparent. Sarah was beautiful, intelligent, accomplished, but more importantly, she was interested in who he actually was, not who she could mold him into becoming. Their first conversation flowed naturally. No games, no tests, no manipulation. When James shared his passion for sustainable design, Sarah's eyes lit up with genuine interest. When she talked about her work in urban planning, he found himself drawn to her mind, not just her beauty. It felt easy, natural, like coming home. Now you're not reacting. You're observing. You're no longer trying to manage her emotions. You're protecting your energy. You're no longer stuck in conversations that go nowhere. You're rooted in silence that speaks volumes. You return to the part of yourself that never needed to be impressive, that never had to prove his masculinity to be worthy, that never mistook being chosen for being loved. This is what Jung called returning to the self. Not the ego self that needs constant validation, but the deep self that exists independent of anyone else's opinion. It's the part of you that knew your worth before the world taught you to doubt it. The part that loved before you learned love was something you had to earn. Marcus, months after his breakthrough with Rachel, described it this way. It's like I was holding my breath for years, waiting for her approval to exhale. When I finally stopped waiting, I remembered how to breathe on my own. The relationship with Rachel didn't end immediately, but it transformed completely. When Rachel realized her old tactics no longer worked, she had two choices: evolve or leave. For a while, she tried harder manipulation. More tears, bigger threats, involving friends and family in their drama. But Marcus had found his center. He listened to her concerns when they were real, ignored her manipulations when they weren't, and never again sacrificed his peace for her ego. Eventually, Rachel chose to leave. She couldn't stay with someone she couldn't control. And for the first time, Marcus was okay with that. Because he finally understood, a love that requires you to abandon yourself was never love at all. You stopped feeding egos, because you finally started feeding your own soul. That's the real power. Not dominance, not cruelty, but calm detachment. She can't hurt you anymore. Not because you've hardened, but because you've healed. The wound that made you desperate for approval has closed. The fear that drove you to sacrifice everything for crumbs of affection has been faced and resolved. When you operate from this place, something interesting happens. The right woman, the one who doesn't need to diminish you to feel powerful, will be drawn to your stillness, your groundedness, your refusal to play games. She'll be attracted to your self-possession, your inner peace, your ability to love without losing yourself. But the woman who needs drama, who feeds off emotional instability, who mistakes chaos for passion, she'll move on. And you'll let her, because you finally understand the difference between being chosen and being loved, between being needed and being wanted, between feeding someone's ego and nourishing someone's soul. This isn't about becoming cold or unavailable. It's about becoming so secure in your own worth that you don't need anyone else's validation to feel complete. You can love fully without losing yourself. You can care deeply without becoming desperate. You can commit completely without becoming possessed. Take David, who we met earlier, struggling with Sophia's manipulations. After understanding these principles, he ended that relationship and spent 6 months alone, rebuilding his relationship with himself. When he started dating again, he met Claire. Claire was beautiful, intelligent, kind, and most importantly, she didn't need him to be anything other than himself. There were no games, no tests, no emotional manipulation. When David expressed his feelings, Claire received them warmly. When he set boundaries, she respected them. When he needed space, she gave it without creating drama. And when she needed something from him, she asked directly instead of manipulating indirectly. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, David told me, for the moment when she'd start the mind games. But they never came, and I realized that healthy love feels boring compared to toxic love. Not because it's less passionate, but because it's less dramatic. This is what love looks like when two whole people choose each other. Peaceful, supportive, growth-oriented. No one is trying to prove their worth. No one is using withdrawal as a weapon. No one is feeding their ego off the other's insecurity. Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." The women who triggered your desperation weren't your problem. They were your teachers, showing you exactly where you still needed to heal. And now that you've learned the lesson, you're free. Free to love without losing yourself. Free to commit without becoming desperate. Free to care without needing to control. Free to be chosen by someone who sees your worth instead of someone who exploits your wounds. This is the inner return Jung spoke of, coming home to yourself after years of exile in other people's approval. It's not a destination, but a practice. Every day, you choose your own validation over someone else's. Every day, you honor your needs alongside theirs. Every day, you love from fullness instead of emptiness. And from this place of wholeness, you attract not someone who needs you to complete them, but someone who wants to join you in creating something beautiful together. So the next time you feel that urge to explain yourself, to fight for her attention, to prove you're enough, pause, take a breath, and remember, the most powerful move you can make is no move at all. Your silence is not weakness. It is your return to sovereignty. You don't destroy her ego by humiliating her. You destroy it by refusing to be controlled by it. And when you stop reacting, you'll see it clearly. It was never about her. It was always about the parts of you that still needed her to validate your worth. And now that you've reclaimed it, you don't need her to break. You're already free. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are." But so many of us spend our lives being who we think others want us to be. We contort ourselves into shapes that please others while suffocating our authentic selves. We trade our truth for temporary acceptance. We sacrifice our souls for the illusion of being loved. And it is here that the essence of Carl Jung Shadow Work begins. Not in fixing what's broken, but in reclaiming what you've abandoned to feel worthy. What if you stopped? What if you chose presence over performance? What if you chose your own approval over everyone else's? What if the next time someone tried to make you small, you simply didn't shrink? This isn't about becoming selfish or heartless. It's about becoming whole. It's about loving others from a place of abundance instead of need. It's about offering your authentic self instead of a performance designed to earn approval. The man who knows his worth doesn't need to announce it. The man who has found his center doesn't need to defend it. The man who has returned to himself doesn't need anyone's permission to stay there. You are enough. You have always been enough. And the moment you truly believe that, the game is over. Because when you stop playing, there's no one left to win. This journey back to yourself isn't always easy. There will be moments when you question whether you're being too harsh, too distant, too unforgiving. You'll feel the pull of old patterns, the familiar comfort of earning love instead of simply being worthy of it. But remember, every time you honor your worth, you give others permission to do the same. Every time you refuse to be manipulated, you model what healthy boundaries look like. Every time you choose your peace over someone else's drama, you break generational patterns of dysfunction. Your healing ripples outward. Your wholeness becomes a gift, not just to yourself, but to everyone who encounters you. You become a mirror for others, showing them what's possible when someone refuses to abandon themselves for love. If this spoke to you, you're not alone. You're not broken. You're just remembering. Let this be your reminder. That peace doesn't come from being understood. It comes from no longer needing to be. And maybe that's the loudest silence she'll ever hear. If you're ready to reclaim the parts of yourself you've given away, take a moment to reflect. What would your life look like if you stopped seeking approval and started giving it to yourself? What relationships would change if you honored your worth? What dreams would you pursue if you weren't exhausted by emotional drama? The journey back to yourself starts with a single step. Stop feeding what doesn't feed you. Your future self, the man who knows his worth, who loves from wholeness, who attracts what he deserves, is waiting for you to remember who you've always been. You don't need to destroy anyone's ego. You just need to stop letting it control you. And when you do, you'll discover something beautiful. You were never the problem. You were always the solution.